I know to be is wrong. I know to be is wrong. But I'd like to know just on the other side. Just on the other side of seeing this being. Just on the other side of seeing this being. Believing in the dreaming and the gods are leaving. The seasons keep on bleeding and we overfeed them. Overneath the D's without the C's to breed them. Well, uh-oh, let's go. Prime time on the number line. Shine like the times in the skies from the underline. Undersigned, undermined, undefined, unrefined. From the empty minds with the eyes on the prize. Until we blind, but we don't mind. We got the options of riding in covens oven as we wash up on the racks by the dock. Shoes socks so through in a hue of blue, only seen in shock. Reptile smile as we eat ourselves whole. Tail first, pale thirst in the burst, in the curse, in the ride chair hearse. Mass grave in a daze, in a maze, in a blur. Incantation, radiation, subway station, radiation. Land in the waiting, plan anticipation, stand innovation, inundation, simulation, stimulating situations, inhalations, inhibitions, in a blurry worry, in a hurry, just on the other side of seeing this beat. Just on the other side of seeing this beat. Just on the other side. Just on the other side.
So thank you. That was beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Really beautiful. Um, so I thought I'd open with a couple things, couple questions that I have, or I guess conversations I wanted to uh, introduce. The first being the source material for this. So it's Carl Jung's um, Red Book, which is little known among even folks who follow Jung or understand psychoanalysis because it was secretly kept by his family for almost 100 years. They wouldn't let anyone see it. It was something he wrote really before his career as an analyst took off or as a theorist took off. Um, and can you sort of explain why you were drawn to the material and why you think that this material took so long to kind of get to the world? I mean, his family notwithstanding, I feel like you both probably have ideas about why they held it so closely. It really was unusual, an unusual document for his um, output.
Yeah, it's a very unusual book, and if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend. It reads sort of like a series of fever dreams where Jung is sort of having these waking hallucinations that he describes, some of which are prophetic, some of which dive deep into the collective unconscious. And they're illustrated almost in the fashion of an illuminated manuscript by paintings that he himself did. And it's really wild. I think maybe yeah, why it didn't come out. I don't know, but I think that there is an element of it where, unlike his other work, it's not concise theories about stuff. It's sort of everything at once. It's like the open current of the multiverse happening, kind of untethered and un.
Well, and I love the way in which transmissions appear throughout the piece because that seems very much to be what he seemed to be receiving in this document. But also, I wanted to connect it to the both of you because Alexis, this is not the first time you've dealt with literary material in your work. You've done a lot of pieces around literature, 16th century Chinese novel,
Clearly, great place to start.
and 19th century, physicists or not physicists, physicians, and poets. But then, Robin, in your work with Indelible Dance, which you're the director and artistic director for, I also thought it was interesting that so much of the work that you've done with Indelible is about journeys. I mean, literally, the last big project you did and the first film that you did was called Odyssey. And, Jung scholars write about the Red Book as being very Homerian, right? As being very much like of a kind of Odyssey. Is there something about that drew you to not just Jung's work, but because it resonated with what you're already doing or interested in or your creative practice um, always recently?
Yeah, this is my project that Robin's a guest on, and there's a lot of Robin projects that I'm a guest on. But I think that the link that you're so astutely seeing is, yeah, we're both drawn to the journey. We're both drawn to sort of the stepping out of everyday reality, and that around us at all times, this magical universe exists if we choose to look at it. And I think that that was one of the reasons when Robin and I started working together. It was just like so immediately. I felt so seen, and I feel we feel seen in each other, and that's such a nice resonance with our work is looking at these kind of stepping out of everyday reality into the non-ordinary reality, which is all over your work and is beautiful.
Well, can you talk more about your work? I mean, preceding this as a choreographer, as a dancer?
Sure. Everything I make is basically autobiographical, but fantastical. So it's always a story about my evolution or whatever breakthrough I just had, but presented in a really surrealist sort of way, which I think comes from, just growing up as a ballerina. The Nutcracker is just ridiculous. Every story like that is just like, what's even happening here? So just sort of wild characters and wild sort of trips and journeys. And so that's carried on into everything I do. But I really, every dance piece or show that I create is a story. I don't ever like to just do dance for dance's sake. And again, the reason Alexis and I really connect is we're both drawn to this idea that magic is all around us if you just open your eyes, and this idea that evolution, self-evolution is really important.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up surrealism because I noticed, like in your hooded figure, I automatically thought of Maya Deren and Meshes of the Afternoon and that kind of cloaked figure
Oh, wow. Yeah.
with the mirrored face. And she was an amazing performer as well.
Yeah.
But also, I'm curious about before we began the performance, we were talking about history and the way in which history informs the way that you think and your interests. And you had said, "Oh, I have these wonderful Bauhaus costumes," and you came out in one of them, the that great piece with the dowels and the
Yeah.
geometry. Um, and that also brought me back to ways in which, kind of similarly, I felt like your paintings and illustrations in the film were very meticulous in a kind of historical way.
They were super influenced. I mean, there was a lot of influences in them, but I think Leonora Carrington specifically and her surrealist work was like really heavy influenced on this one. The work of Louise Bourgeois is like always kind of, and she's one
Yeah,
of
it
my
occurs to me,
favorite.
were those hyenas?
The I think they were all
The
tigers.
creatures?
They were all tigers,
Okay. 'Cause
and
I was
those
gonna
actually,
say, then you'd be getting in some real
yeah, real.
Leonora Carrington
Yeah,
territory, my friend.
she loves the hyena. That short story that with the hyena, and if you haven't read Leonora Carrington, she's an amazing fiction writer as well as an incredible surrealist painter, and had a really wild life story. But the tigers actually came out of a dream early on working on this piece. I had a dream where I had an art show and there were these paintings, and the one of them was a painting that then I was like, oh, okay, this is now, and the thing that had the red tigers, and I realized that had to be a part of this for whatever reason. Similar to Jung's process, I really trusted in any transmissions that I picked up.
Well, that gives me, or leads me, I should say, to another question, which is whether it was the live aspects or whether it was the way in which you were creating the objects, the paintings, or even editing the visual component. How much does improvisation come into your process? Because again, that was all very meticulous, whether it was meticulously danced or animated, but there seems to be an element of kind of openness as well.
Yeah, well, we opened with an actual improvisation before the video started because we thought that would be a nice way to sort of start this off. But my background for many years, I only did performed improvised music, and so although I don't do that as much anymore, I think the ethos of it is kind of always there. And when I'm composing and when I'm working on stuff, I try to get into a state where it's flowing, and it's not. I mean, sometimes it'll start really analytically. I want this thing to be exactly like this, and usually when you try to do that and stay too rigid to that, it doesn't breathe right or something. So I try to allow. Actually, something Robin said to me, which I feel like is a real good expression of this ethos, which is like a great artist has a really detailed plan of what is going to happen, and then you arrive and what actually happens is what is made, and like being able to have the vision and plan, but being able to realize that if you're going to make something, you need to be humble enough that it's going to be, if it's going to be something worthwhile, it's going to be beyond what you could have thought up of, and to be present in that moment to recognize when it's like, oh, this is what it was supposed to be. Oh, right, I couldn't have done this myself. I need to let go, and so I think we both really have that, and that is a very improvisatory, even though we both make things that are very composed or choreographed, but it's with the heart of improvisation.
Well, can you talk about choreographing the pieces in the film?
Sure. Those were so we actually started working on this in 2021. We were just talking about this in during deep quarantine still. And the first thing that we shot with dancers was in Montana. right after we all got vaccinated. And it was like this big, amazing trip that we were able to go somewhere. It was really exciting. So I was really choreographing all of that very privately and very alone inside my apartment. But it had to be very, very particular because it was a film and they had to repeat the work multiple times. Same with what I was making. So it was very organized. Uh, is there, what else can I say about that? What else can I say about the choreography? There were the 3 sections that were made for the 3 dancers who were giving the transmissions, and then the 3 solos for myself. Um, I just really followed Alexis's information, his input, but he gave me a lot of creative freedom, as he always does.
Well,
Yeah.
that idea of tension and the tension of opposites that's so important in Jung is evident in that process, but also in what we've just seen. But it leads me to a question that really informs this work, and it's part of your statement about the cis female dancers, the cis male performer, kind of embodying these opposite forces that appear over and over again in this book, but also in Jung's theories, but at the same time, kind of undermining them or updating them, because I feel like what we've just seen in the performance itself is kind of throwing those binaries to the wind, even as it's playing with them. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the kind of gendered aspects that you're trying to get across here?
Absolutely. So I think Jung posits in the Red Book and out of the Red Book this kind of concept that the soul and the person are of opposite sexes. So if the female character has a male soul or something. So it was sort of a jumping off point of the idea of Robin's character of the conjurer kind of being voiced through my voice. And um I think what's more interesting to me is finding like the bleeding between those things and where they kind of dissolve into a more unified thing instead of it really relying on kind of gender expectation or role expectation and more of like a marriage of human spirit and body, which is kind of the conjurer's goal in her journey in this. Another thing, a little off topic, but kind of more related to what you were saying before, and picking up on your talking about autobiography. This piece kind of was about issues and a lot of issues around ambition and art making in a capitalist society and how that related to Jung, but also in how that related to myself personally at the time. And I think Robin also went on a journey where her feelings around that and ego in artwork were changing. And through the process of making this, she was going through some stuff. I mean, it was deep COVID too. Like everyone was going through some stuff. And then it's like stuff I'm going through now feels like part of my subconscious was like, oh, you're going to be dealing with this later. You make this work that you think is about something that you don't really understand yet. And it's been interesting how it's unfolded in our own like personal lives and kind of enmeshed into the story.
Well, and this is something that you've explored in Princess, in your, I guess, I couldn't even call it a traditional band, but
A collaborative duo.
there we go. But in which this idea of masculinity gets um, questioned, undermined, critiqued, celebrated. Is that a part of your broader practice in terms of not just the autobiographical aspects, but in terms of how it is your creative practice gives you kind of free reign to play with that kind of idea?
Well, I think it's really sad to be like what is societally considered male in a patriarchal society. It's a bummer. And I don't want to live in that world. And so I feel like in my own personal life and in art, like that's I don't want to I don't want to live that way. I feel like we can, political action can take a lot of forms, and one of it can be very personal in how you show up and interact with everyone around you. And then of course making work that addresses that and doing that in public is like a whole other thing. But I feel like those issues are very real to me in an everyday way.
Well, I don't want to hog the mic because I know folks probably have questions for these folks too. So, Sarah, are you out there? Are you Oprah?
She is.
Awesome. So, if anybody has any questions, please raise them up.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Courtney.
Hi, Courtney.
Thank you. I had a question since it's been such a long process for you, for both of you. Which segment or piece resonates with you the most now as opposed to when you started, and why?
You answer.
Okay. Well, it's really interesting. I think part of my artistic practice is there are all these like translations between medium. Like this started with me reading and rereading the Red Book and writing down any imagery from it that really resonated, and then that turned into music, that then turned into paintings, that then turned into video, that then I started talking to Robin, that turned into choreography, that turned into more video, and now it's like the part to actually perform. So up until pretty recently, the last like few months, the performance part of it wasn't happening. So that part is just like a very different experience. You kind of lose yourself. You kind of get extracted out more abstractly into the sea of it. And it's so fun to just have it in your body and then be able to share it with people in a room. It's just such a different part of the process. So that part's the most front of mind right now. But in kind of preparing and watching it, I think the part out at sea where she's in the bed out at sea really resonates the most for me. I don't know why. There's like a quiet moment in that part, and it goes on for kind of a long time. And I feel like it's so saturated in color and in all this stuff and imagery, and there's all this stuff going on to have this sort of vastness of the sea happen and to have this meditative moment to kind of process what has been going on to some extent. I think that part for me right now resonates the most.
Alexis and I were actually just talking backstage about how it has been such a long period since we started this. And originally, when Alexis came to me with this idea, and he said it's about ego death and letting go of ambition. And I thought, well, that's cool for you, but I'm all about ambition and I don't resonate with that at all. And amazingly, like over the course of creating this and then the years that have followed, I've come to a place where I've changed drastically and really let go of those sorts of things. And so now I connect personally so much more with this piece of art. I think we both do, with understanding what it's about. I think even though that was Alexis's idea at the beginning, I don't think he even came to understand what that all meant until more recently. But I hadn't watched it for a while until recently to get the movement back in my body. And the part I enjoy doing the most is that final solo of the snake bird. Yeah.
I have a hope and a dream.
Oh, yay.
Wondering about your art. So this is amazing that we all got to participate in this with you tonight as this performance. How do you share your work, say in a museum setting where it's long term and it's not just a one night performance? Is there documentation, or do you ever show the visuals with the music, and is the dancing included? How does it live in those other spaces?
You know, for the most part, I think both Robin and I's work is like the performance, and it's the ethereal, time-based thing that starts and shared with other humans and then ends. I've had work that's been stuff that's been like installations that have been up for periods of time with video components that sometimes I'll perform live, and then it'll keep going on without me for people to visit and stuff like that can exist. But I'd say the vast majority of it is performance, and it happens and then it's over and it disappears into the ether. I mean, and then of course there's documentation, and which is very important for getting more work made, and so people have some idea what you're doing.
What were originally the cells of, I guess, of those artworks of the tigers and the conjurer exist as very large paintings that are actually for sale.
Oh, right.
Plugging Alexis. And I do
This is
wish
my
that
agent.
everybody could see the physical book that he created with the illuminated manuscripts because it's so beautiful. Yeah.
We had a question over here, I think.
What inspired you with the music? Because it was kind of like mellow, but it went with the graphics really well. Is there any inspiration you took from anyone?
Yeah, I was catching some Stephen Merritt vibes a little bit. Maybe it's just the tone of your voice.
Wait, who?
Stephen Merritt from the Magnetic Fields.
Oh, totally. I love magnetic fields. It's always a very difficult question to answer, musical influences, because I have a very wide appetite of musical influences, and so I love so many different types of music. And what generally happens is it'll just be stuff I'm listening to at the time that I'm like, oh, I love that song so much, I want to make that a version of that, or the narrative will dictate something needs to be kind of like this right now, so it'll kind of go into a genre of what kind of gets the narrative across the best. Or sometimes it just comes out, and the music comes out in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it'll be a lyric, sometimes it'll be a melody, sometimes it'll be very analytical. Like I want to kind of sound like Pink Floyd, but with like Tribe Called Quest happening or something. It could be like whatever. So that process is kind of always unfolding in a different way, which keeps it fresh and exciting. For this one, trying to remember. I mean, I wrote the music's kind of a while ago. It's hard to kind of remember what was going on.
Interesting side note is Alexis sent me this whole score before sending me any sort of imagery or any information. And I was listening to it and I pictured an entirely different live dance performance to it. And then I pitched that live dance performance to a dance company and then came to Alexis and said, I pitched your score to a dance company and they accepted it. What should I do? And he said, okay, I'll make a new score based on that score. So then this score that you just heard was basically you made a cover of it to a performance that then we did together that was presented as a live dance piece.
Yeah. And so the two works kind of became sister works that were both kind of came out of deep COVID time and are sort of different expressions of that. And it was the first time, often in doing scoring, that someone's like, I want it to sound like this and just a little different or whatever. So that's like a very normal skill set. But I had never done it with my own work to make it sound like something I had made before, which was a very funny process.
We keep coming back to COVID. So I want to bring that up because I feel like as live performers who were living and functioning essentially in isolation, like we all were for a good year and a half, 2 years, now that you're returning to performing, how does it feel for us all to be together again? I mean, I feel like as an educator in my classrooms, I'm having to teach my students how to be together again. And from my experience of performances, that's definitely the case in live performances as well. How does that feel as someone for whom or a pair for whom live performance is your lifeblood?
It was rough for a minute. I mean, I remember doing some Zoom performances, it was great to be able to do anything but kind of emitting energy into a void. It was very weird. And it definitely is. I mean, the whole world is different, the same way you can't play music. People get into playing something like exactly like ragtime from the 1920s. And it's like, you can try to play that, but it's just not going to sound really like that because the world is literally like in a different position in the universe or something. And things change and performances of a moment. So the moment has changed and it's wonderful to get in a room with people and share experiences with people again. But there is a difference. I mean, I think that the post-lockdown COVID time feels different than as any time passage. But this one was a pretty heavy thing that happened. So it's wonderful that performance is coming back, but it definitely does feel different. Does it feel different to you, Rob?
No, no. I mean, I'm grateful, that my life is as a professional performer, and it means so much more to engage with the audience than engage with a void. But no, I feel like everything just kind of went right back to how it was, for better or for worse.
Are there any other questions?
I think we have maybe one last question right here.
There was an informal one that asked if you made your own costumes.
I made the costumes with Casey Droege. I found this on the internet, but with the collaborator in Pittsburgh where I live, Casey Droege, made the costumes with her. She really did the crazy Bauhaus one though herself. I was there to be like,
That's
Cool.
the hardest part of the show, is putting that thing on myself in the back.
Yeah, they were talking about how they're going to get it back on a plane earlier.
Yeah.
My name's Deanna. Thank you for the images. They were so astounding. The scariest one reminded me of Cormac McCarthy's The Road, when the woman was coming down on the skeleton horse and then is stabbed by the woman with the exciting tigers. Thank you.
oh, thank you so much. That moment is investigating a moment in the Red Book where Jung is talking about the death of the hero, the murder of the hero, and he brings forth this concept of within our own life, we need to murder our concept of ourselves as the hero of our life, that we are the protagonist of our story, which I really thought was beautiful and resonated with. He goes further and said, then we need to replace that with thinking of ourselves as the Christ of our own life. And I was like, oh, that doesn't seem that helpful. But since reading that and really rejecting it, I think I understand it in a different way now of if we are the Christ consciousness of our own life and treat every person with loving kindness and compassion and realize that we are no greater than anyone else. I could get down with that. He didn't explicitly say that, but I'm trying to clean it up for him a bit. And that seems like a great place to end things.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks so much, Sarah and Carolyn, for bringing
And
us
yes,
here.
and thanks to the MCA folks who are always amazing and welcoming. And if you have any questions for the artists, they are very enthusiastic about taking one-on-one questions. So
Yeah,
hit
if
'em
you
up.
didn't want to talk in front of everyone, please just come and talk to us afterwards. And thanks, Jeff and Andrew, for bringing us, and Rick for doing sound and visuals. And yeah, thank you all for showing up.
Thank you.